All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Village of Cottage Grove Village Board of Trustees meeting. It is Monday, April 3rd at 6:30 p.m. on my watch, Central Time. We are holding this as a virtual meeting due to the election tomorrow and the Village Hall being arranged in such a way to accommodate that. The Zoom link is at the top of the agenda. There is also an audio call-in link as well with the meeting ID number in there too. With that, Lisa, can we just confirm that we have a quorum? I see a lot of faces, but
Sure can, John. Ballwig,
Hi.
Murphy,
Present.
Peterson,
Present.
Stoa,
Yep.
Valencia,
Present.
Williams,
present.
and Whittick.
Present.
All right, we have a quorum. The agenda was properly posted, and we'll try to find a flag for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next, then we have public appearances, public's opportunity to speak on any subject. If you are from the public, we just ask that you share your name, your address, your municipality, and hold your comments to no more than 3 minutes in case we have a number of folks who would like to speak. We did have a submittal form, which I have here from Emily Critchen. She's on 203 Dunco Court. Um, Emily did not wish to speak, but did wish to voice her support for the library. So thank you, Emily. And we'll submit that into the public record. Anyone else on the Zoom that would like, from the public, who would like to speak? All right. Next, then we'll discuss and consider the meeting minutes from our regular village board meeting held on March 20th, 2023. Excuse me. Any questions, comments, edits regarding the meeting minutes as presented?
Make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Thank you, David.
Heidi, I'll second.
Thank you, Heidi. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor then?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. Next, then, moving to unfinished business, and this is to discuss and consider TID number 7 closure or possible 1-year extension for purposes of affordable housing. So, Aaron,
Yeah, so
and
I think this
oh,
is gonna be a
Cameron.
little bit of a group effort. So I'm gonna tag Aaron first, and then we do have Greg here from Ellers available to answer any specific questions. I know there's a lot of information that was sent out, so a lot to consider. But Aaron, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, thanks, Cam. Yeah, like Cam said, there's a few documents here in the packet, but hopefully the staff report kind of gives a good enough overview of that. This is something we started talking about at the last meeting. The direction staff got from that was that there may be some interest in pursuing this. We're trying to find a way to do it that would minimize staff time spent on administrating whatever program we come up with. And then there was interest in also supporting missing middle type housing units. What we came up with as an option would be to use the 75% of this funds that has to go to affordable housing to pay the park fees on behalf of developments that are building these type of units that we want. So the missing middle 2 to 8 unit buildings. And then at some percentage of median income of the village, we're suggesting 80%. We've had a number of projects that could fall into this category, such as Heyday, Metcalf's condos on Cottage Grove Road, the duplex lots at Shady Grove. These are all projects that have been kind of slow to get going for financial reasons, among others. And this could be a way to help kind of motivate those developers to get those projects going, and other similar projects in the future that could happen in our planned neighborhoods. The other 25% doesn't have to be for affordable housing. It can be used for anything that supports housing generally in the village. What we're suggesting with that is using it for some of the sewer improvements that Strand identified in their utility master plan. That would open up some development areas on the east side of the village for new housing, potentially affordable or otherwise. So Greg can probably explain some of the nuts and bolts of this better than I can. We do have to pass one resolution or another. There's two options in the packet, one that would extend the TID for this housing purpose, or one that would close it if we don't want to do that. So Greg, you can steer us back on path if I've taken us in the wrong direction, or help explain some of this better.
No, that's a good summary, Aaron. So the reason this is kind of before the village board now is there's a deadline with the Department of Revenue that's April 15th of every year. That's the date upon which you need to notify the Department of Revenue whether or not you intend to keep a tax incremental district open or not the following year. So if you decide that you want to keep the district open another year and use the increment collected in 2024 for the housing extension, there's a resolution that you can consider that would essentially state the village's preference to do that. If you do not want to keep the district open another year and just close the district, there's a termination resolution that you would adopt, which would inform the Department of Revenue that you do not intend to collect tax increment from TID 7 next year. So in terms of kind of the policy choices here, it's really just a lot about timing. The incremental value in TID district number 7 is a little over 33 million. So we're talking about the timing of when that comes onto the tax rolls. If you do the housing extension and keep the district open for another year, then that means that tax increment value will return to the tax rolls and impact the 2025 budget. If you did decide to close it now, then it would impact the 2024 budget. So you're going to see the impact of that roughly 33 million of value come onto the tax roll, regardless of which choice you make. It's just a matter of timing in terms of when that comes onto the tax roll. And then similarly, when you close a TIF district, you get a one-time levy limit adjustment the year following closure. So kind of right now that levy limit adjustment is estimated at about $53,400. So again, when you get the timing of that will depend on the closure of the district. So it's kind of a choice of kind of two options. It really are two good options. It really just comes down to kind of the timing and closing of the TIF district.
So I guess my thing is I want to open up the board for some discussion, utilize Greg and Aaron to answer questions. I wanted to make sure that you guys could have the answers to make an informed decision. So I'll kick it back to the board members.
Aaron, thank you, Cameron. Aaron, my question is, looking at the memo around 75% for affordable housing, if we opted for this tonight, could the public say, well, they were going to build those anyways? Why did you have to incent them to do it? So like, what would your response be to that?
I mean, they could say that, obviously, and we don't really know for sure one way or the other, but I guess we can say that they haven't been built yet.
Yeah.
Metcalf was approved a couple of years ago and hasn't been built yet. Hayday's gone through a few different variations kind of behind the scenes and hasn't brought something forward back yet. They own the land, they plan to do that, but this is the kind of thing that could help them do that sooner. And in both cases, we don't really have other tools to help encourage that development.
Do we feel strongly, or I guess do you feel strongly that this would move the needle for those developments?
I mean, I think it could help. I know Hayday in particular had some unexpected costs that made their first version infeasible. to the degree that this could offset that. With the project that size, I mean, you could be talking about over $150,000 getting reimbursed out of this program, which I would think would be helpful in getting that moving. Metcalf, I think part of their issue has just been worry about being competitive with similar projects in Cottage Grove Commons, but again, that kind of comes down to finances, and this might help them to feel more comfortable because there's a lot of units there too that could potentially qualify.
Are you saying that the developer is concerned about the vacancy rate of the affordable housing we have, and building more would perhaps not be the right investment for them right now?
I think in the particular case of Metcalf, they were just a little worried that other condos were getting built kind of just a little bit ahead of them. And I think they did want to see how that shook out, but those condos in Cottage Grove Commons, to my understanding, are all purchased in full.
And can you remind me what on a per 100,000 basis, what it means to the taxpayer to close it?
I can answer that. So if you took the 2023 adopted budget as just an example, and say the TID District 7 would have been closed, and impacted the 2023 budget, and roughly that 33.4 million of incremental value would have returned to the tax roll for a $315,000 house. The village's share of the tax bill would have decreased about $84. But it's worth noting that the closure of the TID district impacts all taxing jurisdictions, but that's just the village impact on a $315,000 home.
I guess where my head goes is the upcoming referendum and what that's going to mean to taxpayers, and whether that we can help offset that, because I think as a village, you can never predict what's going to happen, I guess, but have we ever not passed a referendum for the school district in this village? I don't know. But that's where my head's at, about trying to help offset some of those potential increases that are coming.
I've been thinking about this a lot since our last meeting, and it was helpful to get some of those figures, Greg, that you calculated on the tax impact, and $84 just the village portion. Getting that tax. I'm always hesitant to make decisions based on what other things may happen that are outside of our control, but Vince, you made a good point. Offsetting this potential referendum. I feel like this is almost 1 year too late. Last year probably would have been a really good year to have, us hold off a year and collect that for housing. So I'm really torn, because I do really think that this would be, a good size unit and thing that would really benefit our housing stock. But just looking at the tax reality that's likely coming up next year, I think closing is probably where I'm leaning.
Keep in mind, Heidi, though, like this housing is going to also add, so it's not a tit for tat, right? It's not like if we don't close it, we don't get any tax value. So to what Greg's saying, it's not like you wait a year, there is no benefit ever for homeowners, right? I think that, with all the good work we did in the housing study, we just had the leakage study done by the Chamber of Commerce. This is staring us in the face of that we need more missing middle housing, and we have an answer here. And for me, it's like you're losing the forest for the trees, right? Because you're like, but we can get $84. Like, I get it. Like, I would love to have $84 of offset, knowing that, to Vince's point, there's probably a referendum potentially approved tomorrow. But I just think that, in the grand scheme of things within Dane County, like, this is a real opportunity for us to add housing stock. And, 20 years from now, this could be a real buffer longer term. I think it's a longer term play. It's short term pain for long term gain.
I agree with David. The Cottage Grove market analysis, the 2019 Dane County Housing Needs Assessment, Wisconsin Realtors Association special report, housing task force, they all say the same thing. We're not building enough housing. And they all mention missing middle housing. I think this is, I'm worried that if we close it, we're sacrificing long-term progress for short-term advantage. I think this is an opportunity we can't really pass up, because when we close TID 5, it's probably too big of a project, and we're gonna need the levy relief at that point. So we're not gonna be able to do this again for TID 5. So I don't want to, because once we close this, there's no going back. We're not going to be able to come back and say, no, actually, let's do that. Whereas levy limit relief, we can get in a year anyway. So I think it's safer and more in line with what we need to extend it for a year to work on some housing. And I think that Aaron and Cameron have done a good job of finding projects that are going to make efficient use of staff time. So I would like to commend them for that. I did have a question for Strand, if they're available.
See Kayla's on.
Hi, Chris. Yes, Kyla's here.
Okay.
So in December, the Utility Commission approved
Mhm.
authorizing Strand to design the lift station on the east side.
Yes.
Do you know the progress of that?
Yes, so there's going to be a task order that's actually in Brian's hands for Utility Commission next week. In discussions with Brian, and Josh is actually going to be at the utility meeting next week to discuss it as well. We're actually, instead of designing the full-on lift station for that ridge lift station area, it's going to be more of a preliminary engineering report. So we're going to get to a point where it's going to be almost 30% force main. You're going to have kind of two different layouts of a lift station and an alignment for that force main to get it from where it ends at Main Street in Progress. This way it sets up the village to have that option to see what developments come in and the best location for it and the size of it. We're going to come up with a couple different locations to best utilize that area, but until you have a very interested developer, that'll lead to a better location and you can size it better for the future. So we don't want to over design and then not need it, or under design and need it in the future.
And in situations when we're doing a new neighborhood, is a lift station like that, is that mostly financed by the developer, or is it mostly the village, or a combination?
In this case, it'll be a combination, if I'm correct on that. JJ and Brian, it'll be, the developer's not going to want to come in and put a regional lift station in for that area. So they'll pay a portion of their cost of what it would be for them to put infrastructure in. So if they only needed an 8-inch sanitary sewer or a 4-inch force main, but we're putting in an 8-inch force main, the village will offset that cost.
So Chris, just to elaborate, if it was, if the need for the lift station was 100% driven by the development itself, then and all the use was going towards that development, then the developer would pay for that. There may be times when, if it's in a TIF district, where that may be a project that could be eligible for help that way, but generally speaking, it would be 100% developer. And as Kyla mentioned, if there's a regional basis, it may be something that is either multiple developers or combining to help pay for it along with the utility.
Okay. And I think, if I recall correctly from utility and talking with JJ, that part of the reason we have had issues not getting that neighborhood off the ground is developers don't really know what's going on with that lift station, because we need it. So I think using 25% of this TID to show those developers, hey, we're going to help you build this lift station, is going to make it more enticing for them to build more. And in the long run, it's going to help us.
I guess just follow up on Chris had some good point. Everybody's had some very important things to consider, and I appreciate that. And I was just wondering if whoever wants to chime in, maybe Aaron or other staff, what are some other ways we could incentivize? I know a lot of it's laid out in the housing task force, but get to the same point, but also get some other creative ideas on how to do this. I want the best of both worlds, but I don't really know if that's possible. But just looking for a little brainstorming.
mean, financially, it's a little tougher if something happens to be in a TIF district. We can help that way. Where the districts are, they're not necessarily conducive to the missing middle type housing. They're probably better suited for the larger projects like Cottage Grove Commons was. Otherwise, a lot of the things that are in the housing study are more regulatory, just kind of making the process easier and less cumbersome, fixing some of the street widths and setbacks and things like that that can add cost to a project sort of unintentionally. But a direct financial incentive is this is kind of a more unique opportunity, I would say.
Heidi, this probably doesn't help answer this question, but just from additional information with the Heyday project as an example, or the Shady Grove potential multi-family projects, those being outside of TIP districts, Heyday as an example is probably a minimum of $40 million as a project, could be up to 50 plus. So we're talking 1.5 times Summit Credit Union headquarters, and that would be immediate. That would be more than TID 7 in one fell swoop on one project, and immediate benefits to the taxpayers. However, as we mentioned, there's no crystal ball if this would help move that forward in any certain time frame, but it certainly would not hurt.
What happens to the monies if this doesn't incentivize the developer to build those missing middle units?
Greg, I'm going to defer to you on this one. I think there's a point when we can give up, but we have to return the funds as if it would be like a surplus, but I don't know what that formal process would be.
Sure. So, if you do the housing extension, you'll collect the 2024 increment, and that gets set aside in its own separate fund. There's no statutory requirement for how quickly you need to expend those funds, and also you can expend them anywhere in the village. So as Aaron's outlined, you kind of have some identified objectives of how to use these funds. If those intended uses as you have them outlined now don't come to fruition, you have the option of coming up with different programmatic objectives as long as they're meet the general TIF statute for the housing extension. If you decide that there's really nothing left that needs to be accomplished, they are kind of excess TIF funds, so then that would get proportionally distributed back to the taxing jurisdictions. But before that, you could easily consider if you had other objectives that you wanted to accomplish and repurpose those dollars towards other housing needs.
Yeah, that was Greg's recommendation, how we wrote this up. The resolution doesn't specify, the missing middle and the park fees. It references the separate project plan document. We could go back and change that project plan document to give it a different focus if we want to at some point. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
I have a couple questions based on that answer. So would the expenses need to be incurred in 2024, or are you saying that money could sit aside and we could access it in 2026 even if the TID already closed? Can you just clarify when those expenses or when we'd have to give the incentive?
Yes, there's really no correlation between the existing TIF district. It's just the vehicle to collect the funds. So once you collect the funds, those funds get set aside separately. There's no spend down period. So if you want to sit on these funds for 5 years, for 10 years, you can do so. So you can spend it anywhere within the village as long as it meets the general statutory criteria of the TIF housing extension.
Thank you.
So Greg, as you mentioned, if we would extend the TIF district as part of the 2024 budget, I would recommend creating a affordable housing fund. That way that fund is available for when the TIF district has to close sometime in August, and we would transfer those funds into that new fund created. Sarah, I don't know if you sounded like you might have had one more question too.
Yes, but thank you. Yeah, just one more question. Can you, do you know what 80% of the median income is of Cottage Grove right now?
If the median income was right under 100,000 for a household, so that 80% would be 80,000.
80,000. And then 30% of 80,000. I shouldn't do my math on live TV here. Um, I guess I'm just trying to figure out what would that make the expense of a condo, for example. What would we be asking developers to?
I believe it would be a rent or mortgage of just under 2,000. So I think most multifamily type units would qualify.
Yeah, probably so. Okay. And that would just, let's say it was a rent an apartment, would it be in their developer agreement that we would stipulate like they need to have their rents kept at this level for a certain number of years? Would it just be for when they first open in their initial leasing?
Could be either. I mean, certainly we can put that kind of limitation in the developer agreement.
Thank you.
How much are park fees on average for?
So for multifamily, and we're just talking about the park improvement fees, not necessarily a fee in lieu of parkland. For multifamily, we base it on the number of bedrooms in the unit. So it's about $600 per bedroom approximately.
Why do we use median versus mean in this equation? The middle income versus the average income. Can you just explain that to me?
That's typically the figure that's
essentially
used for
anybody
this.
to the left of 80 grand.
Yeah. That's typically what's used for this kind of thing, just so there's not someone at a high end that's skewing where that the average might come out.
I guess, okay.
Bill Gates moves to the neighborhood and all of a sudden our average is 10 times higher or whatever. Yeah.
If we did go through with extending this, is there a way in the agreements for like any new housing to prohibit like housing associations from being there? Because it would seem to me to be kind of silly to make affordable housing and then have those places get nickel and dimed by an HOA or something like that. I don't know if we can do that or not.
I'm not sure. That may be more of a legal question. If we have Rick or Larry on.
We can come later. We can figure that out later. I was just kidding.
Chris, I know we talked previously. One of the things that you addressed was the two units, because there was a study that came out that said we have basically too much parking. I know you initially we talked about changing it from 2 to 8 to 3 to more, to eliminate the kind of make the housing more dense.
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of bring everybody in the loop on that. Did you change your tune on that, or thinking?
No, I still. So let me explain. The housing task force. One of the things that they found was that, well, one of the things they want to look into changing is parking requirements, because like I think it's single family and then duplexes require 3 parking spaces. So I was just thinking it might be smarter if we extend this to change it to 3 to 8 units, so that we can kind of, I don't know how long it's going to take before if we change any ordinance for parking. This would just be a way to kind of get around that so that we can make it a little denser before having to change the parking requirements in the village.
Chris, to your question, I mean, Aaron, I'll take every opportunity to sing your praise about the housing study, but I mean, there was a pretty extensive kind of task list at the back of that document, right?
Yeah.
you know, and I guess just having been the chair of that committee, I should probably push for more of those action items to be on more of the village board meetings. But again, it moves. And I asked Aaron this question point blank. I said, how do we step through this? Because it moves as fast or as slow as you want it to move, right? So I mean, we can change these ordinances. I mean, we can rack and stack things as often as we want. I think that this, you're kind of getting back to my earlier question around like, for 75% of this for affordable housing, do we think this will move the needle? I think Aaron and Matt were pretty clear that we think it might, but we won't know, right? So that's what led to the questioning of, okay, if we have to sit on these funds, like what other options do we have? Can we give the money back? Can we find some other ways to use it? And it sounds like there's options. I think, you know, I just to reiterate, like we can move as fast or slow on all the ordinance things, but I think this is a good first step to help enact what the housing study came up with.
Yeah, and I mean, I just wanted to make people aware of it because, like, I don't know. It says, where does it say this? Parking, parking, parking. Where's the parking?
I think
I don't
if
know, but I don't
else,
know. I don't know how fast that's going to get changed, and like, I just in case that this goes through and then they just make a bunch of duplexes. That's a bunch of parking. We not might not.
sure, I think, and Aaron, keep me honest here, but like, if anything, the street widths were a big deterrent. I mean, like, and again, JJ, help me out here. Like, it's for every foot you add, that I mean, it's exponential in costs, right? For width of streets, right? And so, and I distinctly remember that heyday talking about the width of the streets and the parking, and so you're spot on, right? But I think heydays had found some things that added some unexpected costs, right? So I think this, in addition to other ordinances we can change, could I don't think it's gonna, you know, take this. I don't think it's gonna drastically cut the cost of the project, but it would probably it would take enough off the project to make it palatable.
And I mean, if we pass this, it might give us some incentive to pass some of those recommendations from the housing task force faster.
And we're starting to work through those with the plan commission. They got their assignment to read the document for this next meeting. We're gonna let them ask questions and have a discussion around it, and then the meeting after that, we'll start getting into those first couple of action items that are in the chart in the maps.
I thought of one other question briefly, and it's more about the lift station. Are impact fees, water and sewer impact fees eligible to be, well, I guess it would be the sewer, to expend on the lift station?
Yes.
They certainly are. So as one of the first kind of things I worked with JJ on was kind of looking at our water and impact fees and what do we have and what are some eligible projects, as well as we're currently working with Trilogy to actually kind of refresh our water and sewer impact fees. But offsetting there are some significant costs that were identified as part of the master plan, just in water and sewer in general. And so that was a consideration to use some of those fees to offset that as well.
Thanks.
Are there other questions for staff regarding this item? Otherwise, we have two resolutions on the table here that for consideration. I don't know if anybody's ready to make a motion or not.
I have just one final question, and it may have been answered with the initial questions about what it happens to the budget, but are all of our budget projections, Greg, that you guys have been putting out when we've been looking at included TID 7 closing in 2023, right? So does this have, other than that $84 for a typical house savings and taxes next year, any other budget ramifications of closing a year later?
Really, all the financial benefits, the incremental value going back onto the tax rolls, which would provide some tax relief, and the one-time levy limit adjustment, it just shifts a year if you keep the district open for housing. So you don't lose that benefit, it just delays the timing of it.
And to Greg's point, I mean, we do have some work to do on the 2024 budget, but we'll kick that off here in the next couple of months. Not That's not a hole or anything that would next year be impossible to overcome. We weren't banking on that additional levy support for next year.
You weren't, you said.
No.
Okay.
Again, obviously, we only can work with what we can levy. So we're exploring all different options for creating additional relief.
I had one other question then for maybe Cameron or Greg. Since we're only, well, last year we were at 30% of the total property taxes. I pulled up our tax insert from last year, but this would go for everyone. So can we like extrapolate a little bit, like how that would benefit the taxpayer overall? We're talking about $84, but that's just for our portion of the levy, right? I mean, this would impact everybody's, like the school district, and it wouldn't
Yeah,
just be the $84. Yeah.
right. We could do the exact same analysis and just extrapolate it out to the other taxing jurisdictions. I don't have that right at my fingertips, but we could certainly do that.
And would we have to get their approval to extend it?
No, this decision is entirely rest with the village board. So I mean, we would certainly inform the other taxing jurisdictions of, what your intention is annually. What's called the Joint Review Board, which is kind of the board that consists of all the other taxing jurisdictions and a public member that kind of oversees TIF districts. They meet annually. So we would give them that update this year, and certainly, suggest if you decide to pass either one of these resolutions, we would inform the joint review board of the village's decision, but they don't weigh in on either resolution.
Greg, real quick, so the $84 you mentioned for a typical home, that's just village taxes, or is that consideration of school, MATC, et cetera?
That was just village taxes.
Okay, so really, for the typical home, it's going to be a bigger impact because the school system, for instance, will get a portion of this. MATC will get a portion of it. Granted, what they do with it, we don't know, but
right. So really,
thought isn't always a good idea, but probably around $250 around there.
I would say that's in the ballpark.
Confirming, yeah, ballpark math.
And again, it's what we're talking about here is the timing of when that's impacted. It's not that you're gonna get it or you're not gonna get it. It's whether it hits the 2024 budget or it hits the 2025 budget.
Right, I knew that.
Can you restate that, Matt? Can you tell? I kind of couldn't hear you.
Oh,
250
sorry.
or 84 or how? Can you kind
High
of
level, I mean, yes, probably likely between, we'll say $250 and $270 for a $315,000 home. But we would want to, we can double check on that, but that's kind of the ballpark I think we're looking at.
I think one of the things I'm just kind of struggling with, and maybe it's just people I know, is that how is this kind of maybe viewed as a subsidy for a wealthy developer? You know what I mean? Is that do they need that money to build this, or is it really going to incentivize them? And why should we incentivize them? Are they hurting for money? Will they not make a profit on these buildings after they build them? I can just hear that coming, because we would be extending this beyond the period that we agreed to in the first place. But just something that I'm cognizant of.
I think Vince, the thing to remember is Hayday could go build their condos in Sun Prairie or McFarland or Marshall or Madison, right? So we're essentially competing for their business. And TID districts, whether I'm going to give you my take on it, and people feel free to disagree with me. But TID districts, at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You're trying to buy the business. By extending this, we get two birds, one stone. One is we get to help affordable housing, and we get to to build missing middle housing, which every expert on the planet says we don't have enough of and need more. And this will, you know, incentivize them to do that. I mean, again, depending on how you want to look at it, you're like, well, you're giving a wealthy developer, but I mean, you know, I think that's one way to look at it. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. Because Heyday's been coming to us for months now, if not a year, maybe close to, and it still hasn't moved the needle.
I just want to make one comment. And this maybe is a TIF 101 for people. But so TID 7 is not, when we pass a project plan, it outlines the maximum life of a TIF district. So the maximum life of this TIF district, actually, the last year is to collect is 2025. So TID 7 has done so well. We worked with Greg and have identified it's recaptured all of its planned project costs. So that is giving us the opportunity to close the district early. And then we're looking at it as we're closing it early, but we're potentially extending it a year. So this may come to a surprise to the county and school districts that are even considering closing it this year, unless they've attended the joint review board meeting and asked questions. It might not be on their radar.
So by that, do you mean even if we extended a year, we're still closing it earlier than it was anticipated to close?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's just yes. Like it's supposed to go till 2025. I just think, again, I keep beating a dead horse here, but I mean, like, housing has consistently been one of the top 10 priorities of the board for the last 3 sessions. So I just like
At least 3, yeah.
it's no brainer as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, everything I hear convinces me more and more that we should extend it. That's my take.
And we're not necessarily locked into the park fee idea. It sounds like we could update our project plan if we decide something else would be more incentivizing for specific to housing, right? We could update that if next year they don't do anything and it's not the park fees that are helpful.
Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're approving the resolution, which references that plan. I think we can, if we're not ready to sign off on that plan at this meeting, we can continue to tweak that until we're happy with it, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, we typically, the DOR doesn't require in the resolution that you go into, every exact fine point of how you're going to use the dollars. You've got, program requirements and criteria that you're going to establish. So as long as it meets the statutory requirement, because all the statutes require is that they define affordable housing as housing that costs a household no more than 30% of its gross monthly income. That's it. That's the statutory criteria. So you've got a lot of flexibility in how you want to choose to address that.
And so if we set out one program plan this year, but it didn't work, next year, could we rewrite the program as long as it fits that statutory requirement?
That's correct, because I think, we don't, if you decide to keep the TID open another year, we won't know the exact amount of increment that you're collecting until all the budgets are adopted. But I think conservatively, you're talking about around $670,000. That's the pot of money that would be set aside to, fund these programs in the future. And if you want to make programmatic changes, you have the flexibility to do so as long as you're meeting that minimum statutory criteria.
And just to, man, I want to hear that again, that Heyday alone was looking for what kind of valuation?
It was just a projection, but their project would likely be in the $40 million range at least.
Yeah, I mean, like that's more than, like you said, that's more than the TID itself.
Yeah, it's more than every project in the entire TID 7.
I get it. I want to help taxpayers, but at the same point, like this, you could get double your bang here by extending the TID and taking that money, it's the catalyst that creates more building, right? That gives you even more tax offset later on down the road. Granted, the time to Greg's point, I think he's very eloquently saying it better than I can. Is like the timing is everything. Again, short-term gain versus long-term gain, and I think the long-term play here is the better one.
And I know I think you said this earlier, and I'm sorry that I didn't quite get it, but is Heyday in a TIF district?
No,
Okay. So if they started building stuff, we'd get tax stuff right away? Tax stuff?
tech stuff, yes.
One point I guess I do want to address, and this comes from a debt perspective. If we would use some of the funds, the 25% to reduce the lift station, that would be less that we would have to borrow for, which would give us some levy relief. That we can always go the revenue bond route for that project, which would not put us subject to the geo debt limit. But if we were going to go the geo debt limit, using that 25% to reduce the borrowing costs would indirectly help the taxpayers.
Cameron, just a little bit of amendment to that. I think it would help our debt capacity, but not the levy, because it would still be the utility paying for that debt.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I'll make a motion that we extend TID 7 for affordable housing per the resolution as drafted in the packet.
Second.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, David. Any other discussion? Having heard none then, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
No.
Anybody abstain? Motion carries. All right, next then we have new business, and this is to discuss and consider an alcohol license application from Grace Coffee, Cottage Grove LLC for the licensing year of July 2022 through June 2023.
There is a memo in your packet that explained the license. The background checks were completed and approved by the police department, and Chief Gary did do the walkthrough and he approved that as well. So staff is recommendation for the license.
I'll make a motion to move approval of the alcohol license for Grace Coffee.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, David. Any further discussion?
I was just looking at the dates here, Lisa. It says July of 22 through June 23. Is that?
Yep.
Is that retroactive or?
Nope. So it will start as of the issuance date, which will be actually tomorrow, but we're in that license cycle. So actually they're going to get this license. It's going to be good until June of this year. They're going to have to do a renewal, and they'll be in the renewal packets
Okay.
with all of the whole list of all the alcohol license in June.
Okay. And then with this one, they have, and for this class, do they have to have operators on site in order to serve? At least
Yes.
one? Okay.
Yes.
And that's, maybe I'm missing it in the packet, that like that, everything's good there too?
Yeah, so you don't see those, that's the email you get out weekly because we can approve them in the office now. So if they pass the background check, then we put them on the spreadsheet that you get emailed each week. So they will
Okay.
have to be getting operators. Their agent will be able to be a licensed operator, but if they have other people that are working other shifts, they will have to get more. And
Yep.
they're well aware of that as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other discussion? All right, having heard none then, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. Then we move right down to reports from village boards and committees and commissions, starting off with Pure Court. David?
Yeah, we met Tuesday, March 21st. Briar Patch was a little late, but all's good right now. Only 2 open cases, and we were not able to talk about goals. Unfortunately, we moved that to the next meeting, and then we set a new date, and then we close the meeting.
All right, thanks, David. We'll move then to Parks, Rec, and Forestry and Sustainability. Heidi.
Thanks. So we met on March 23rd, and we had Aaron joining us to talk about the Parks and Open Space Plan, which is kind of our framework for future parks. It's a requirement to get grants, and it might be statutory requirement, I don't recall. So that's kind of wrapping up. So we'll see that going through its final drafts and coming up through the board soon. We've been working on it in sections. We also talked about the potential to add AEDs in village parks. So staff's working on some more information on that. And so we'll be bringing something forward shortly regarding AEDs. Then since our meeting, we have opened the bid packet for the bids for Bakken Park. So we're going to talk about that shortly. And then we have another addition for library programming. So I can turn it over to Strand or Sean to go over the Bakken Park numbers.
Thanks, Heidi. I'll start it out. I'll just give a brief overview of the project, just in case you guys haven't thought about that. I'm going to share my screen here. Let me know if you can see that. Maybe. There we go. Everybody see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So just again, a quick overview of what the project entails. Obviously, we're talking about eight lighted pickleball courts in this area right here. We're talking about 4 lighted tennis courts just to the south of them, which could double as an additional 8 pickleball courts if we so choose to go that route. In the center here is 122,000 square foot of multi-programmable green space. What you're seeing there, just for reference point, is 5 flag football fields. So we could move our flag football program there. And that space is also big enough for an additional full-size soccer field. A 10-foot wide trail connection from the newest part of the Glacial Drumlin Trail. So starting at the north and then carrying all the way down to past all the courts and then moving west and connecting again to the Glacial Drumlin Trail as that moves out of the park. 76 additional parking stalls in kind of the center with a little bump out here so people could drop off if they had little ones playing or in the green space. The project also includes making this retention pond here about 30% bigger than it currently is in order to handle the additional impervious surface with the courts and the parking lot. And then finally, in kind of the center next to the pickleball courts is a 20 by 40 small shelter with 2 unisex bathrooms, a small covered picnic area that we'd have about 3 picnic tables underneath that. It really just there to provide some shade. Picnic tables, as I mentioned, a drinking fountain, and then some storage space, which would allow us to put equipment in there for programming pickleball or tennis or flag football or any of those things there. It's been brought up before, do we really need another restroom there? One thing that we did a little math, and we're about 800 feet from the current, as the crow flies, from the current Bakken Park shelter, so way over here. That's about 800 feet away. And then we are about 700 feet as the crow flies from the Lions shelter. The closest shelter to that area, the closest restrooms would be the ones in the hamburger stand, and those are not ADA accessible at all. So we wanted to make sure that we had some facilities close to obviously the new parts of the park. This would be scheduled to be the final phase of development for Bakken Park, and So we'd be looking to close things out. So that's kind of the overview of the project. Does anybody have any questions on that? I'll stop sharing. Do you want to pull up the shelter one?
Yeah, the cross section of the shelter.
Yep. Just so in case people are wondering what that was going to look like.
Yes, I can. You're able to see my screen now?
Yep.
Yep.
So as Sean mentioned, you'd have the 2 unisex bathrooms, you'd have a small mechanical room here in the middle, and then storage on the back side. And then you'd have the drinking fountains. And then this would be where your picnic table layout would be. Kind of the elevation view is very similarly looks to this as we included in the bid documents. And the outside, the technical term, the blocking and everything would match the park over at Miracle Field and by the splash pad. So it would be the intent so they would look similar throughout all of Bakken Park.
Thanks, Kyla.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of the overview of the proposed improvements. If there's any questions, I can take those. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Kyla, and she's going to talk about the bid opening.
No questions for Sean? That means I'm going to get them all, Sean. So we opened bids, as Heidi and Sean mentioned, last Wednesday at 2 o'clock. We had 3 bid. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. We had 3 bidders. We had Drax. Ooh, this is extremely unfortunate. We had Drax Inc. out of Madison. We had Hamburg out of Monona, and Joe Daniels Construction. All 3 were relatively close to each other. Here's kind of a summary sheet that it's easier to see and read. Based on the budget that was passed last October, and there were some memos that went out today via Cameron, the construction budgeted for all of Bakken Park was $1,400,000. Given that knowledge and coming into the construction bids, we kind of broke them out from a base bid into 4 different alternatives to capture everything that the village had wanted to do. Back in January, February, we went to Park Commission, and instead of doing a basketball court, it was changed to do a tennis court there. So that's kind of where part of the cost difference came into effect, and then as well as there was larger stormwater management that needed to be done, and lighting just keeps increasing as we've seen even just from last year to this year, from the skate park to the Bakken Park improvements. So Drax Inc. was the lowest bid that came in. Their base bid included everything that Sean discussed, minus the 4 alternatives. So I'll kind of go through the 4 alternatives first. Alternative 1 is to replace about 300 linear feet of asphalt path here between Miracle Field and the rugby fields that's in poor condition. Bid alternative 2 is both the pickleball lighting surrounding the pickleball courts as well as the tennis court lighting. However, in the base bid, the conduit is going to be included for all of that. So you'll have the plastic conduit piping that's going to be installed as the base bid, but the light poles and the actual lighting components of all that is a bid alternative 2. Bid alternative 3 includes the prefabricated shelter. The sanitary sewer and water service will already be installed as part of the base bid. This way, all of that infrastructure is there if that alternative is not chosen. And then bid alternative 4 is solar panels on the shelter. Obviously, you can't have the solar panels without the shelter, so that is why that's bid alternative 4 at the end. So looking total, you have a base bid come in of $1,221,816. That comes in underneath your budgeted $1,400,000. Bid alternative 1 is $39,000 and some change. Bid alternative 2 with the court lighting, $367,500. Your shelter, 347,600, and then the solar panels is 440,000. So in total for the base bid plus the alternatives, you're looking at just over 2 million. And this is all in for the construction aspect. As Cameron sent out later, and I'm sure he's going to mention as well, this does not include the site furnishings, which was another 25,000, as well as the site security that has been implemented through all of the parks that Sean is doing, which is about 26,000. So in total, you're looking 2.28 with all of the improvements together. Obviously, there's different ways this can be split up, the base bid itself, and then different alternative options that you can see here and that were included in the bid packet. That's all I've got. Is there any questions for me before Cameron goes into his side?
Has Strand worked with Drax before?
We have not personally within Strand. Sean has made a couple calls. We got their qualifications list and some other previous projects, so Sean can speak to that. But we have not worked with them locally, but they are out of Madison.
And how about their subs? Any of those we've?
Yes, we have worked with them. They are having, and I wrote that down. I don't have it. I know Cottage is their concrete. They are using Tri-County for asphalt paving, Century Fence for pavement markings, and American Fence, which is out of kind of middle of Wisconsin, for their fencing and athletic equipment. So we've worked with I know of 3 of the 4 subs for sure.
Thank you.
And just remind me again, when we call it, I guess I'm getting hung up on the jargon. We say alternatives, like bid alternatives, like the last time you guys came in front of us, right? Like we had talked about some of these alternatives, hadn't we? Like I'm just trying to piece the timeline together. And I know, Sean, in your memo, it kind of outlines that a bit, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details here. Because we go back to March and January.
So David, I think I can kind of jump in here with Sean too. I think there was an understanding that once the lights came back at significantly, more than what was anticipated, we had to go back and work with Strand to make this bite size. So with the base bid, we needed to get it down to 1.4, and then with the 200,000 of engineering, that gets to the budgeted amount. But there were some critical other things in the park that, since we were bidding out the other things and they're things that I think the village eventually would like to do, it didn't make sense to come back and do these projects when everything was mobilized. So as part of what Kyla and her team brought back was, this is what it would take to complete the park, to get everything kind of finished and polished off at Bakken. So that's why in the memo, we started off with okay, this is the scope of the project in the budgetary memo, and then Zach and Sean worked on a kind of revised scope of the different sections, and now with the bid opening, we kind of got that big scary number to kind of make a decision on. So one of the things, Kyla, if I could share my screen.
Absolutely.
All right. Hope everyone can see what looks like March 31st.
Yep. See it.
So I guess the biggest impacts, what I feel like it's my job to inform you, what would be the tax impact of this all-in investment. So Ellers came in and did analysis of what the project scale at $1.6 million would be, as opposed to the full all-in cost. So in the memo that I prepared and sent out, you were looking at a total of 200, and this is, again, the difference, not the total cost of the project. So with everything included, you're talking about an additional $64.60 over 20 years, and an average per year additional cost of $13.23 for the average home. So obviously not a small amount. And I also tried to working with Sean, summarize the different alternatives. And really, the alternatives at a high level are different ways we can get to what is the village board willing to spend on this project. As we have written out, the alternative one is really a more or less a required alternative that we need to do. It is very that alternative when we're talking about cost is very minimum with those with grants we've received in the past and things that we just need to get done. The two big projects are alternative 3 and 2. And working with Sean, he's identified as the shelter being a larger, and the park in general, a larger accessibility and functional piece of the park. We labeled alternative 3 as, obviously this would increase the availability of the park, extend the hours. And then number 4, while that total amount for alternative 4 is only 40,000, it is additional cost. And just another thing that's broken out, that if the board was looking to reduce the scope of the project, we just wanted to put that out there. So
Yeah.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
That was $264 per year.
Nope, over the 20 years.
Oh,
so,
okay,
so
for the 20 years. Got it.
So you're looking at additional per year on the scope from the original scope of the project, about $13.23 more per year on the average home.
Got it. So 264 over the course of 20 years.
Yeah, correct.
Got it. Thank you.
And Cameron, the solar panels will more than likely pay for themselves in probably 10 years or so, based on this research I've done.
The solar panels, I guess, from a $40,000 cost perspective, and just the sustainability and potential credits out there, in my opinion, I think it's going to pay for itself in, like you said, a certain point of time. I don't think you're really having any major impact on the project budget by cutting that.
But in order to do the solar panels, we have to approve the shelter. Right.
I would think so.
So that $13, Cameron, that's for option, the base plus options 1 and 3, right? Is
that's all, or that's everything. Yep.
Well, just to clarify there, Cameron, that's for just all the alternates. Does not include the base bid.
So what that impact is the difference between $1.6 million in borrowing and the $2,260,000 in borrowing that would be required to finance the project. Again, as Matt said, that's just the difference, not what the total project cost is.
Can we use the TID 7 extension to pay for any of this?
No, unfortunately not.
If it goes into the park improvement fund, then that'll cushion the park improvement fund in the future. So then we wouldn't have to borrow as much to improve parks in the future. Although that would get paid anyway by the developer.
Well, sure, but like, so it's the difference between account A and account B, right? So you put less in the park improvement fund because TID 7 extension is funding that fund, but which leaves more funds for. And I realize I'm stretching here, so don't like. I'm just again trying to build business value here and why we did the TID 7 extension, because again, like, this makes sense. You need a bathroom, right? So the shelters make a total sense. But I mean, I'm really struggling here to like say no to any of these alternatives. You have to do the base just to do the project in and of itself, and all the alternatives, like, I could make an argument against alternative 4, but at the same point, like, those pay for themselves. So, and you're talking about $264 over 20 years. to a house to add those 4 alternatives. Like, again, I don't take joy in spending the public's money, but at the same point, there's a lot of value you get for this, and we're going to be the pickleball capital of Dane County.
Yeah, just to add on to that, it would make having the restrooms there and shelter and water bottle filling, it will make it a desirable place to host pickleball tournaments, which would bring more people into town, especially if there's lights and they can play once it's dark. So, I mean, just to throw that into consideration.
I'm sure the chamber would be happy to put something out there for a pickleball tournament, wouldn't they?
I mean, it's a destination park at this point, right? You've got pickleball, you've got the green field, you've got rugby next door, you've got, the baseball diamonds across the street, in Fireman's Park. I mean, like, I'm really struggling to find a way to say no to this. Just, I don't know how to say no.
David, is that you making a motion?
Well, I guess the question, maybe, I guess the question is like, if you would defer something, what would, other than, the solar panels and the lights, and again, why would you put up pickleball courts without lights? I mean, yeah. I'll make a motion, prove as written, along with all the alternatives.
David, could I stop you real quick? If you're gonna approve the project as is, I would make a motion to approve the base bid with the 4 alternatives. The one thing that was missed in the staff memo was the security cameras. So I would do the memo as described, plus the security system.
So moved.
All right. Is Lisa, do you able to capture that?
Got it.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Who's Vince?
Oh, I think
Second, third.
Heidi may have got you, Vince. I don't know. We'll have to roll back the tape. So, any further discussion?
Oh, I did have one.
Oh, go ahead, Heidi.
Oh, are we awarding the bid to a certain bidder or or does that come at a different time?
That would be my follow-up question. So if you're going to approve all the alternatives, would you also like to award the contract to Drax being the lowest bidder?
Is there any due diligence that's been done on that firm? References, etc.?
Their references and qualifications were dropped off at Village Hall today. So Sean and Cameron have those on hand. And those, go ahead.
I have those available, Vince, for anybody who'd like to take a look at them.
Is there anything of concern? I guess they get to choose their references, so they're not going to send you bad ones, right?
Vince, that's why I asked about the subs, if we've been exposed to the subs before, because generally they do a lot of the work anyway.
Based on everything I've seen, their qualifications, they meet all of the standards. They will have to have their insurance qualifications. From what Sean and I have discussed, they have the financial capability and the staff. However, I just can't, not working with them from Strand, I can't give an opinion one way or the other, except that we have worked with their subs.
Isla, do we have a substantial completion date?
We do. We actually have 2 milestones and a substantial and final completion date. So milestone 1 is the Friday, a week and a day before Fireman's Festival. So June 9th. The contract has to have the pickleball courts, the parking lot, and the tennis courts all base coursed to be able to use that area for overflow parking and for Fireman's Festival. And then milestone 2 is September 1st, which requires everything, including restoration, paving, lighting, everything to be completed except for the shelter. Due to shelter delays and the prefab process behind that, we're seeing that takes longer to get to site. So September 1 is when everything should be completed. And since the board did decide to move forward with the shelter, final completion is November 15th to allow the installation of the shelter itself.
Okay, thank you.
Does that milestone one include painting the courts as well?
It does not. It's just going to be rocked. So everything will just be base coursed, rocked to be able to use that for the festival.
In that case,
Painting the courts would be done by milestone two, Chris.
Correct.
As long as they put the holes in the right place.
That is correct.
ooh, shots fired.
That will never happen again. Just like Brian said, it'll never snow again.
Yes, thank you. Needed to hear that. Kayla, thank you for that. Lisa, I'd like to amend my motion to also add approval for Drax to do the work.
Heidi, you good with that?
Yep, second's good with that. Thanks.
Can I just ask, what does this do to our overall debt borrowing capacity? And are we giving up something that we might want to do in the future? Because I don't know, if I had to not do something, I would choose to not do the court lighting right now, given that it'll all be based in, but I just want to understand what we're possibly giving up.
That's a great question, Sarah. Because of the, where the financial management plan left off, we really didn't do any projects this year, including major maintenance or any type of road construction. So essentially, if we're thinking about even at a $3 or $4 million annual budget for kind of bigger projects, we're well below that threshold. So that this does not put us in a bad position from a debt capacity standpoint. I would be wary about, and I did mention in my memo, if you would like to do the court lighting from a financial perspective, you will probably be worse off in a debt capacity perspective deferring it than doing it with the current bid as is.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Any other discussion? All right, having heard none, all those in favor then?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. All right, Heidi, you have another discuss and consider there too as well.
We had one other thing, and this came up separate, but we do background checks on all of the Parks and Rec coaches and programs. So it was, since the library programming has been run under Cottage Grove Parks and Rec, that was the procedure we were proceeding with. So I can turn it over to Sean, and I saw Cindy on here earlier, but my participant list is closed. I assume she's probably still here. I can turn it over to them to explain more of what they're looking for.
Yeah, I'll jump in first. As Heidi mentioned, we do background check any of our coaches, volunteers, anybody over 18 years of age, and we've just kind of continued to do that when it came to library programming. And it may be that we're being a little, we're going overboard a little bit on our background checks with the library folks. So Cindy wanted to bring that forward and just talk about if we needed to continue with as many background checks in the library. Cindy, you want to elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, I think just we've been background checking every single person for all of the programs that we have, which includes all of our virtual webinars, our adult programming, and then our kids and teen programming, and eventually our senior programming too. The first time we did background checks was librarians from McFarland, and they were the first ones to ask us why we were background checking. And it just doesn't seem to be really the standard around the area libraries that we, like Monona and McFarland. Madison does things a little bit differently. Again, they have a lot of branches, and Madison's obviously a lot different than the suburbs. So I just wanted to bring kind of these items for consideration that's kind of outlined in that memo, just because I think it aligns a little bit better with what other area libraries do, and I think it's just more appropriate for library programs.
One thing I'll add too is just and Cindy added it to the memo, but just to point out that $7 per background check, 40 plus programs and growing, you know, that could start to take away some, you know, story time and like it's taking the both for Tracy and Cindy the capability to do things, right? Because we don't have a huge budget. So I think it, you know, I support doing away with this for the library just for the fact that Monona and McFarland thought we were crazy for doing this.
I support it as well, but I do have a question: is that why would it be appropriate for a Parks and Rec person to get a background check and not a library person? I'm just curious. They both are around kids all day. I assume that's why we're talking about background checks.
Vince, I kind of got the background on this. We've been advised that just best practice when anybody's working alone with children, that it just covers our bases a little bit more than it being, you know, a huge news story that, you know, something happened with one of our employees working directly with kids. So I think it's always been a better safe than sorry. So I wouldn't recommend, at least on a park side, going away from that.
So I'll just add from
not...
sorry. From a library perspective, we don't have like programs where, at least at this point, where children are dropped off and alone with a performer. Our toddler stories, like all the parents stay with the toddlers during Zumbini and story time. And I think, you know, I tried to outline in there that if it was an event for youth under age 18 and it was like a drop-off event, that we would background check those performers. And then we do, and Tracy is at all of the events. She's the organizer, she's the Zoom, what do you call it, like leader, host. So she's got control over all of that too, and she's background checked.
Other questions? Otherwise, this is discuss and consider as well.
Make a motion to remove the requirement for background checks for library programming.
Can you make it as presented in the memo? So then if it is a youth drop-off event?
Yeah, as presented in the memo. Thank you.
Yep, I'll second that.
All right, thank you, David. Thank you, Heidi. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor then?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. All right, then, Heidi, anything else?
Nope, that's all. We'll meet again in April. Thank you.
It is April. Wow.
Oh, yeah, I know.
All right, next then, NADVIG landfill monitoring review, Vince or David?
Yeah, we met Thursday, March 23rd. We approved the minutes from the previous meeting. We approved paying of the landfill monitoring bills. We took a look at, I think they had some testing and monitoring results. Could be found in the packet if you really want to look through it. And then we set a meeting date for the next meeting and adjourned. I think it was all about 10 minutes.
All right. Thanks, David. If there are any questions, then we'll move right to joint fire. And there is a discuss and consider here.
Yeah. Let's see here. Approve the minutes. We went to the chief's report. Then we ultimately approved purchasing a new air compressor for the emergency services building. Who knew there were that many options for compressors and air dryers so that the air brakes don't rust. We ultimately did approve not to exceed $3,500, and that fits within the ESB fund, so we were good there. And then we discussed and considered the consolidated joint fire agreement, and it was approved. At which point we then take it to each of our respective municipalities to approve. We'll approve that here in a second. We then set the next meeting date. I don't think at that point we really had any future agenda items. We then went into closed session to talk about Pleasant Springs. And then we opened the meeting back up. There were no consideration of closed session items, and then we adjourned. No questions, then I guess we just talk about the joint fire agreement.
All right, and it's been a long time in coming. I appreciate certainly the efforts from the committee to sort through that, going from about 10 different agreements, sub-agreements over the years to something now consolidated, and each municipality can understand it, hopefully. Any discussion regarding that, or discussion consider?
I just want to express my gratitude to the village lawyer and David for all their hard work on this. They put a lot of effort into it, and I really appreciate it.
Only thing I will add, John, is it's no longer a committee, it is now a commission.
Thank you, David.
It took us 3 meetings to figure that out.
And we'll have to change that accordingly in all of our documentation too as well. Assuming that this agreement is approved.
On that, I would make a motion to approve the fire district agreement as presented.
All right, thank you, Heidi. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Chris. Any further discussion?
I just have a clarifying question. I know one of the many existing agreements was also included the fire association as a contracting entity. Is that going to, will it be a separate contract now that we sign with them?
Yep, that will be a separate contract. So this is the agreement for the district commission between the town and the village, and then there's a commission and agreement with the fire department, Inc. So that there are some overlaps between the agreements, and so we'll need to at the next meeting more than likely talk about what the overlaps are. And April actually brought up in the last meeting, she's like, we should probably have things in both agreements, at which point I was like, that just becomes a boat anchor, right? So if we update it in one agreement, we got to update it somewhere else. So in talking with Rick, it's probably wherever you have verbiage, just have it in one agreement, don't have it in both, because then you'd have to make sure they're updated. Because if you don't, you forget about it, then it becomes a point of clarification required in lawsuits. That's never a good thing. So that's probably the next steps here is to modify the agreement between the district and the fire department.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? All right, having heard none, all those in favor then?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. Anything else, David? Vince or
Nope,
Chris?
that's it. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Yeah. No, again, thanks to the commission for getting that sorted. Then we move to reports from village officers. Larry or Rick?
Nothing new to report today. I will thank Chris on Rick's behalf for his shout out on the work. That was all Rick, not me.
All right, thanks, Larry. Then we move to Cameron, the finance director. Got a few discuss and considers here.
Thank you, John. The first thing I have to discuss today is we last week or the week before, time's kind of blurring by, there had a demo of the boardroom technology and equipment. I would like the board to discuss and consider the proposal for the boardroom equipment. The total equipment came in at $50,866.10. Any questions for me?
How soon would we get it in if we approved it? Sorry, Vince.
That would probably, JJ, I'm not, outside of the final number, wasn't sure.
I I know originally he said they were on the shelf, but we had quite a time coordinating that demo. So I will reach out and get an update on that.
I think a big factor in this, if they have to order, so there's two parts of the proposal. We have to pay a certain percentage down for them to even order the equipment if it's missed. So once this is approved, we would cut a check so they can order the equipment if needed. And then it's kind of working on our time as time allows our people to get things installed.
Cameron, where does this where does that cost fit in with what was estimated in the budget that was approved?
The total budget that was approved was 65,000 for the project, and my next memo has a recommendation on what to use some of that savings for.
Thanks.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the proposal for boardroom technology upgrades and equipment as written.
Thank you, David. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Chris. Any further discussion?
Cameron, are you
about? Sorry.
Well, just really quick, are you gonna buy the not NFC, the cards? Like I saw that in a quote. Are we gonna bother with the hotel room keys?
We can certainly scope some of that out. I believe the current quote does have that in.
I thought there was like only two or three of them. I don't know. I thought it was a nice to have. I didn't think it was a need to have.
I'll buy 10 of them on Amazon and donate them to the village. How about that?
We can. I can certainly dive into that more and as we're working on the final steps in ordering. But you're saying you would like the extra the SIM cards?
I mean the cards were nice, but I don't think it was an absolute requirement. But it sounds like Vince just volunteered to buy 10 of them.
I'll buy 50. I'll buy 50 of them. How about that? That's probably $20.
Nice.
I did have a question about ongoing maintenance and how we're going to account for that in future budget years, because I'm sure there's some cost in perpetuity, right?
So, yep. You know what, that was one of my big questions about, how long do the batteries last? How long, does the mics last at the demo? And one of the things that I'm working with Johnson Block or IT Larry is now that we have all this great technology implemented, we need to kind of come up with an IT maintenance plan or schedule to ensure that we're properly accounting for yearly replacement of these things. So essentially handing over kind of all of our major IT equipment and things that we're using, and then have him come forward as part of a budget request during the budget cycle with a recommendation.
So I guess I was actually thinking these would have some sort of annual maintenance agreement where if something goes on the blink, it's covered, but it's like going to Radio Shack, I guess. Huh? You just go buy it, and if it works, it works.
Yep.
It sounds like it was in the software was included, so there wasn't an annual software fee. I think David I think you might have had that question at the.
I had asked Vince. I said, what is there any annual maintenance? Is there any software assurance requirement? And the answer was no. I mean, it Shure is an awesome, audio provider, but they still look at it as if it's a microphone. It's a piece of audio equipment. They don't see it as a software purchase. I think they put more time and money and effort into the actual physical hardware than they do on the software side of things. That said, I think Vince, you and I had asked a lot of questions about updates and how does it update, and it's a revenue stream for them that they're not tapping into. That doesn't mean that might not change in the future, but he was pretty clear. There's no ongoing maintenance. There's no software requirements. There's no licensing involved. It's just you buy it and we give you the software updates for life. And it was like, okay.
It's a good deal for us.
And based off of, and if I'm interpreted it wrong, it sounded like the life of this equipment would be 7 to 10 years before major improvements would need to be made or changes. I don't know if other people heard differently.
I mean, that's what I heard, but Vince and I have been around long enough to know that, like, if they tell you 7, it's either going to be half that or it's going to be double that. It's going to be one or the other. It's never, rarely is it ever, 7 years. Somewhere between 7 and 10, you have to change these things out. And because it's sure, I mean, my brother was a DJ for a long time. He says it's probably good for double that. But again, I have 3 kids and have been in IT for 20 years, so like, my money's on less than more. But we'll see.
All right, any other discussion? All right, having heard none, then all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries.
All right, the second thing, and I'm actually gonna, Mark, if you don't mind, if I'm not putting you on the spot, want to kind of describe the project and what the body worn cameras and how this came along. We followed up with an email and then again with the attachment on the agenda items. But Mark, if you kind of want to give a start the picture, and I'll fill in where needed. No. Mark, I'm not hearing you. Is anybody else hearing him?
Double muted, Mark.
I did my homework if I have to. All right. Well, I'm not hearing Mark, so I'm gonna do my best interpretation of Mark for this, because he was very passionate about this specific project. So currently we are contracted with Axon to as kind of a service organization. They provide cameras, and then they also store the video footage on the cameras that are. Oh, I hear you, Mark, now.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Sorry.
All right, I'm kicking it back to you.
All right. Sorry about that, folks. Anyways, when I came on board, it was discovered that Axon, who we had our body worn cameras through, that contract actually expired in November of 2022. It was a 5-year contract. It was a lease program. I obtained some information from Axon for a preliminary extension, i.e. another 5-year contract with them. Their original proposal came in at about $94,000, at which time I said, I want to look at different alternatives. I did a little more research. Obviously, I have some past history working with both body worn and squad cameras and a couple different vendors out there. Through that, I was able to find that I could truly save the village some money and still get a compatible product. Actually, the village invested last year in new squad cameras, the in-squad camera system through Panasonic. Though we're not able to bundle the package. I was able to find through Panasonic their body worn camera system. We can integrate it with our squads, which will simplify the process both internally and externally, and still save the village some money. So I talked with Cameron and we crunched some numbers and brought the proposals forward, and that's where it sits at this moment. I did look at another vendor that I had worked with once before also. And the thing is, going that route, I'd still be operating 2 different systems, where if I go with this Panasonic plan, it's one system, everything's compatible, and we'll get some additional features and functionality that we need as it relates to open records requests and things of that nature.
And kind of to Mark's, part of the reason why we're looking into, as part of this requirement, we were required to house the data. So Axon is currently housing our data currently. Part of what we're proposing to do is house that data in-house. Unfortunately, the way with the levy limit and the way things are structured, we're actually incentivized to take out debt and kind of have capital expenditures over annual operating expenditures. It allows and frees up some levy space or breath here. So that's one of the benefits of going to this option. We're looking at about $5,000 on average cheaper by owning our own equipment. The one thing that we have not done with what I'm recommending from a budget perspective is we haven't finalized what that server looks like from actual hardware perspective. We're going to meet with Johnson Block during our quarterly meeting on the 5th to discuss, okay, this is the route we're going. Now, what does an implementation schedule look like? One of the challenges here, the longer that this project is deferred, we owe Axon a monthly, essentially, service fee that's higher than I would say their normal if we were under contract. So we are time is of the essence to make a decision on what we want to do with this project. Mark, and I guess the biggest kind of thing I think a lot of board members are wondering, what does this mean to our bottom line? With some savings of other projects, and again, not all of these are final, but overall, with kind of some ARPA projects that are coming in or very under budget, that allows us to kind of tentatively not have to use any additional ARPA funding for this request, but primarily funding the request initially with ARPA funding. And then in the future, having this included in our capital IT budget.
One other thing I can add is related to Axon. When they found out that I was exploring other options, that's when they came back with the $80,000 price tag, and that was with me telling them that I was looking at a price tag of around $70,000 by their competitors. So they still didn't even come in competitively from my perspective, in the overall picture.
Yes,
Chief,
oh, go ahead, Vince.
I was just I actually had a few questions, and so I don't want to take up the whole time. So the Panasonic car cameras, are those housed with Axon right now? So are we storing the video there?
So the squad cameras, again, this is replacing existing in-squad video cameras. We house those videos in-house already.
So, and the server there is not sufficient to add a mere 18 cameras?
That's not sufficient. So the upgrade with the body-worn cameras, plus we have to bring all the data that currently Axon has over to our server, which is about 3.5 terabytes right now. So that's exactly getting the space and with retention plans.
And part of this is we want to isolate PD and PD related files on its own segregated server. And part of this would be, David and I talked extensively in the fall about eventually going to a cloud-based server for everything else. This does put us on a cheaper path in the future on getting everything separated, to be able to make that switch, because I didn't realize that that's what the vast majority of our current space is being used on. So it's kind of a benefit there as well.
Well, there's just on the subject of cloud, depending on what you come across, and I'm sure you come across all kinds of things, but I'm concerned about compliance, specifically like a SOC 2 or HIPAA compliance if you have somebody with a medical emergency, and their health information is on one of these videos, are you telling me that our server on premise contains the security necessary to be compliant with HIPAA and SOC 2 and GDPR? I guess that's one of that's a thing that could get us in some trouble. And so that's more than just security. That's people with certain certifications running things. And so security and compliance are two major things that a cloud service provider can really help us shore up and kind of share risk, right? If it's on our server and somebody hacks it, that's on us, right? If we share that risk with a cloud service provider, we at least have typically there is a dollar amount that they will be will pay up to if something is accessed. So that would be two of my concerns with going on-prem. The other is maybe accessibility, right? Like, Chief, how are you going to access video if you're working from home that day? Do you have like a remote desktop that you can get into that thing with? Or how do we access that stuff when we're not sitting in the police department?
Yes, it would be accessible as I am currently accessed into our network right now through Johnson Block and through All Security using a dedicated village computer. So, and that's how my command staff and officers would have access, is through dedicated computers that only are allowed in through the firewalls. And I completely understand the concerns about the hacking and things of that nature. And again, I can, not bashing my old agency in any way, shape, or form, we housed everything in-house. Truly, the PD had both the village hall and the PD servers, but I can tell you that the security systems that are currently in place in Cottage Grove are about 10 times what I had at my prior agency, in the levels of security. So, which is good. I'm happy. And that's why making this recommendation, it's a little easier for me to say that, bringing it in-house in addition to providing that savings for the village in the long run.
I have two more questions, David, and then it's can you kind of talk about the operational advantage of purchasing 18 cameras versus sharing cameras at shift change? Is the juice worth the squeeze if we got to replace 18 every 5 years, or is it that do we need like 8 or 9 and they could be shared between shifts? I guess that's one question I had.
Sure, be happy to answer that. There's a couple different benefits to it, and trust me, I completely understand the sharing aspect. The downside is when you start sharing the equipment, you're going to be running those potentially 24/7, depending on how many units you get. The other aspect of it is there is a level of personal pride in the equipment you're issued and you're accountable for. So, i.e., if someone isn't taking proper care of, I can go to one person and say, look, this is your problem. It's the way you're treating the equipment. Versus if I'm now having to go, let's say we have 3 officers that are sharing it. We've all been in that position where it's their fault and they're pointing fingers at each other. And who do I hold accountable? Again, not that I can't find out, not that I can't figure it out, but again, in the long run, we'll get better use, longer term, I'll say longer service term out of this equipment if it's not running 24/7.
And then my last question about the integration of Panasonic versus other brands. Is that a fact. I mean, are cameras not agnostic to the software or storage of video? I mean, you have to have the same brand cameras to make them work together.
Everybody's sorry. Everybody has
proprietary.
Yes, thank you. um, so it truly, and especially when you're talking with the security levels within the camera systems, the encrypting and the coding that goes on, when, and again, I've worked with Panasonic before, I've worked with Custom Signals before. You can't just bring their cameras into the others without there being truly, they won't mesh. So you end up running two separate platforms.
Thank you.
And again, when I brought up the whole, I'll bring up redaction for open records requests. We have an obligation to redact certain things out. When you're running two separate systems, obviously you got to do double the work to redact that stuff out of there. Compared to one system, we can get it all covered in one foul swoop, make it a nice package.
Thanks, Chief.
Chief, can I ask you, in terms of the due diligence that you did versus Axiom, Panasonic, were there any other brands that you look at, like Motorola or any others, or did you just have a vendor that you previously worked with and went to them for a quote?
No, in February, I attended the Chiefs Conference up in Wisconsin Dells. I looked at as it would be. There's Motorola. There's WatchGuard, which actually is also vended through through Baycom, which handles Panasonic. So did a comparison there. Like I said, I actually had experience from prior agency. The last system that I brought in there was Custom Signals, which was a both body and squad cameras. Prior to that, I had VView for body cameras. They were bought out by Axon, so they really don't support the VView anymore. And prior to that, and actually we were running Panasonic squad cameras, so I had experience with Panasonic. Again, due to the fact that the village had just made the investment in upgrading the squad cameras in last year's plans, that's where it pointed me towards Panasonic to see if we could get if we truly could monopolize and make the best investment for the village.
Okay, but I guess my question is, just as a follow-on, right? Have you shown any of the officers in the department, like have they done any comparison? Is there any from a body camera? Like, is there? And again, I haven't seen these, and it's been a long time since I've worked around this stuff, right? So like, the form factor keeps getting smaller and smaller. I remember when I mean, it was like a hubcap sitting on your vest, right? Like, how does the Panasonics compare to the older ones that we currently have? Has the general consensus been good, bad? And again, at the end of the day, they're going to wear what we buy, right? But I'm just curious, just out of personal curiosity more than anything. Like, is this change well received, or is this going to take some time to get over?
No, truly, I think it'll be well received. The operation of the camera is very similar in nature, and truly all camera system, body worn camera systems have tried to simplify it as much as possible to make it the easiest for the officers. There'll be some minor nuances to it, but they won't be so major that they'll cause hesitation or reservation. The other upside to it is we already know if we go this route, Panasonic will have training for the officers. Truly, we'll probably end up getting someone in-house trained to then train the officers in the use of it, the full capabilities that it has. Which one of the gripes that I've received is Axon never followed through with that in the 5 years that they've been with the village. So that was a disappointment for me to hear.
Okay. Thanks, Chief.
Any other questions for Chief or Karen?
No questions, but I will make a motion. But Heidi, did you have a question?
I did have a question.
Okay.
I was just wondering if our IT provider has experience working with server security in this area.
Yes, we take and I appreciate Mark the kudos on what they do for security. We really hold Johnson Block and ask Johnson Block to do a lot from a security perspective, and ask our staff who get to jump through all the hurdles to make sure everything's secure. But yes, we would set up additional security measures for that.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we implement the Panasonic body worn cameras as described in the memo, including but not limited to ending the service agreement with Axon and implementing server modifications not to exceed $60,500.
Thank you, Sarah. Is there a second? Vince, I think that was you, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor then?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Chief. The last thing I have to discuss is just the corresponding budget amendment to kind of reallocate costs based off of what actuals are coming in. So that would be budget amendment 2023-002. Looking for some discuss and consider.
I'll make a motion to approve the budget 2023 budget amendment 2023-002.
Second.
Right. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, David. Any further discussion then? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. All right. Thanks, Cameron.
Thanks,
Yep. Next then, communication miscellaneous business. First up is consideration for the vouchers.
Make a motion to approve the bills as written.
Thank you, David.
Second.
Oops. I'll let Lisa decide who that was. or
I
clarify.
think it was Brittany, right?
I think it was too, but
I don't know.
all right. Any discussion then? I actually had a question. There's a new window door cutout. It was listed on there. I can't remember the amount or whatever, but was that in Village Hall? Just it's a clarifying question.
I believe that was the final invoice for both the Public Works and park, so Public Works / Parks, that cutout to go over to the Parks area, and the window at Village Hall in that office.
Okay.
So it was one project, but the final invoice for everything.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Having heard none then, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. Correspondence. I didn't have anything. I don't know if anybody else did. Next then, upcoming community events. We have some Easter egg hunts coming up, I think, somewhere. All over the place.
I mean, I think like every park on Saturday you can hit an Easter egg event.
It looks like it.
I also wanted to throw out there the Earth Day with your friends. We have the rain barrel and compost bin pickup. If anyone wants to volunteer with myself and Brian to help hand out rain barrels and compost bins, just let either of us know. And then I also received some from the county. The shelter construction will begin at McCarthy Park. I think it's set to begin this week. And they have a youth service day every year, and that will occur on April 29th from 9 a.m. until noon. Kind of a cleanup, weeding of the native prairie area or pollinator garden at McCarthy Park.
All right, thanks, Heidi. And McCarthy already had that foundation, I think, done for the thing too from last year. So should be quick work, hopefully. Future agenda items. Matt, Aaron, Cameron, anybody, staff? Certainly have plan commission items to consider.
Do we need to do any considering for No Mo May?
Was that the last meeting?
That was last meeting, Sarah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Sorry, I wasn't here. Okay, good.
No, it's okay.
It was approved again. Anything else?
The one item I have to share, so Baker Tilly completed their audit last week. I was happy to result there weren't any material changes to the financial statements that I prepared that they reviewed. They have told me that they plan to finalize it April 17th or 18th and present at the May 15th meeting. I believe that's the date.
Cameron's being modest. He didn't have any, they didn't have any journal entries that we needed to change, which is, I've never seen that ever. So kudos to you, Cameron.
Thanks, Matt. So excited to share that. And Amanda is planning on presenting on May 15th. At the next meeting, Sean and I will do a presentation about EADs, or one of those EADs or EIDs. AEDs. There it is. A project that I think is very cool and could have a big impact in the community. So excited about that. We just needed a little bit more time. He was working with Chief Gary and then Eric over at Chief Lang over at EMS to kind of talk about some considerations in that. But then that'll be it for hearing from me in a while.
Well, maybe not quite. We're also working on, and no promises for the next meeting, but we'd like to get you guys a draft of an updated capital prioritization process soon. So even if it's a first draft, we might want to get that in front of you sooner rather than later so we can kick that off to get some feedback.
All right, thanks. If there's nothing else, then we'll move right to item 11.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, thank you, Brittany. Is there a second?
Second.
I think that was Heidi. I don't know. Maybe it's Chris.
I think David was a little late on that one.
Anyway, it's non-debatable. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.
Vote tomorrow.
Yep, go vote.